seen our survivor movement grow, and it's so important to notice that, I think today especially. But what we're learning, I guess, as well as our survivor movement grows, is that survivors have so much knowledge to share, but they may not always wish to share it or be best placed to share it in the way that they're expected to. I think one of the things that I've learned when I first started this work is that, we felt so blessed to even be allowed in the room, to be even at the table to contribute. And so we worked really, really hard to make sure that our presentations were academic enough, that we could hold our own in a room full of professionals, to prepare for the panels, to do the things that made us fit with this sector, to be able to be seen and to be heard. But what I also want to do as we grow this work and as we engage with survivors is to create a space now we are willing to hear survivor voices in the way that they choose, in the way that they want to contribute, and that might look really different. So you might have been a little bit intrigued about this next part of our panel. We're calling it a Collective Voices session, and we are breaking out of that mould just a little bit because I really wanted to give survivors the opportunity to share the knowledge that they have, particularly around this theme of response and remedy to modern slavery, in the way that they chose. So you'll hear today that's going to be, some people will be sharing poems, some people will be sharing some reflective writing, some art. So they're going to share their message in the way that they would like. And I think one of the things that's really important to me is that as you take this, take yourselves into this forum, that these voices stay with you. And all of the things that they will share now, I'll ask them to come up actually and join me, everyone that's on the Collective Voices panel, to come and sit with me, because we will be sharing our voices, and we hope that you can take those messages with you as you engage in the rich program that we have available to you. I really want us to encourage all of us to open our hearts. We might hear some hard things, we might hear some joyful things. All of the things that we're sharing is about how we would like things to change and how we want to come together to change. That might mean that we need to address some of the hard topics. So we always intend that to be in the most constructive way, and we hope that you can hear it as such. So as I will be introducing each of these wonderful people individually, but I felt like I shouldn't throw people under the bus for doing something new like this without also standing up there with everyone. So I will also be sharing a poem. As we think about this idea of remedy and response, it's really important to me that we think about what that might look like for a survivor, because I think the system has lots of specific answers about what remedy and response looks like on paper and the intentions that it has, what people think they are trying to do to help us recover, heal. All of those themes are things you're going to be hearing about. But I think sometimes our experiences of that can be quite different than what it looks like on paper. So I'm going to share a poem that I wrote a little while ago when I was struggling with housing and had some big challenges that I was facing in trying to get help. And I've called this poem, When Help Doesn't Come. I thought I had made it safely onto a ship that was moving me over the water. Or at least they let me sit on the bow. For a while I thought I would make it across. I was on my way. But the storm came and rocked the ship that carried me. I tried to hold on, to keep my balance, to anticipate the waves and stay away from the edge. But to no avail, I fell into the deep. The water was dark and heavy, and I was afraid. I swam hard and I peeled off all of the parts of me that I could shed to make it easier to swim. I fought the current, and when it overpowered me, I tried to work with it. But even that couldn't save me. I was drowning. Strength was fading, and no matter what I tried, I was failing. And so I did the most difficult thing. I asked for help. But help didn't come. Instead, the people I called to stood on the shore. They asked me why I had fallen in, and they explained to me all of the reasons why I shouldn't have. They said that the way I was swimming was wrong, but they couldn't tell me how to do it better. They told me that they would ask if some boats might be available to come past at some point. They talked about the possibility of lifelines, but they said that I would really need to prove that I needed one. They told me that if they were to throw me one, I would have to explain that there were no other lifelines I could find on my own without them. They told me that the water wasn't really so bad. Lots of people experience water. I was drowning and time was running out. I felt ashamed that I had asked for help, but mostly I felt bad that I had fallen in. I felt even worse because I couldn't pull myself out. I wondered if it wasn't better if I let the water take me. Maybe the darkness would let me rest. And in a way it did. I turned from the shore and I stopped hoping for the help, because waiting for a lifeline that wouldn't come was taking strength that I didn't have. I let the water carry me down. But as the darkness swallowed me, it stirred a deep drive for survival. I summoned my last strength, the burning breath inside of me, and I found an undying will to stay just a little longer. I turned to dive with the darkness, letting it take me as far as it would go. The fear turned to familiarity. I had been here so many times before. The tide lifted me forward, and there was a surprise glimpse of a few beacons that showed me the surface. I found a little more strength, and I swam into the shallows. Reaching the shore, I drew the earth towards me. There was no strength yet to stand, but I knew I would one day, albeit dripping with shame. I'm going to speak now, just as we hold space for that, purely as a survivor, so I'm taking off my work office hat, sorry James. I don't say this lightly, but the trauma of trying to get help as a survivor of modern slavery has been as traumatic as my experience of modern slavery itself in many ways. Differently, but it has left the deepest kind of pain of betrayal in many ways. When I started advocating on this, I was often told that it was just my experience, that other survivors do get help. And I have to say, I'm still looking for those survivors, these unicorns out there that have apparently had this help that has restored them in a way that is not the way that this poem has described it. Even yesterday, in the midst of preparing for this forum and all of the busyness, I spent quite a lot of time supporting yet another person who was struggling to hold on to life because of this very issue, who last week had dragged themselves to help after months of crisis, because that had actually been created by engaging in a criminal justice process, and shared with me the great relief of finally having arrived at help because they were referred onto a support program. For the first time in 4 days, they were able to buy food. But yesterday, within days, that was at the start of the weekend, within days that hope was crushed, because the onboarding process to this crisis service reneged on the help originally promised to say that their focus was to ensure that this person or the help that they received didn't create dependence for them in the future. But this person is drowning. I don't know how many more times I will need to hold these moments. When instead of a lifeline, their outstretched hand may as well be met with a high five as they're going down. So my message today to those here today that have the power to help, please consider the way that you make people struggle for it, the parts of their dignity that are stripped away as we are pushed to drown harder before help arrives. And to everyone who's struggling, especially my fellow survivors, you're not alone. We will continue to fight, to hold on to hope together. You matter, you are worthy, and I hope that you hold on to life a little longer.
Hello everyone, my name is Nanushka. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm here to tell you a story. A story about how it feels to be victimized again. But this time, something was different. This time, the systems for me actually worked out. I've been stumbling through the modern slavery space for the past 2.5 years, and I mean literally stumbling. I was a sex worker who couldn't stay quiet. I kept speaking up about everything that was going wrong for my community. The violence, the discrimination, and the constant struggle to access support. I didn't realize at the time that what I was witnessing was sexual exploitation, that what I was seeing was modern slavery. Last year, I almost gave up. Nothing seemed to work. No matter how many times I tried to get support for others or for myself, doors kept closing. I was tired, I was vulnerable, and I moved to Melbourne hoping for a fresh start. Unfortunately, the violence and exploitation followed me there. This time, though, I wasn't alone. I connected with Project Respect, an organization that specializes in supporting sex workers who have experienced exploitation. They listened, and I mean they really listened. They took the time to help me unpack my experience and started immediately connecting me to support. Support that I've been trying to access for over 8 years in New South Wales, and it never came. It took 3 months of unpacking until I was referred to the Support for Trafficked Peoples program, and it saved my life. When I ended up in hospital after another violent episode, it was Project Respect and the SDPP who caught me. This time, I wasn't alone. This time, I had support. And this time, I could finally leave. This STPP funded me accommodation while I was preparing for court. And then the day came, and I was there all alone in front of the court, seeing and hoping to get an interim family violence intervention order. And I got it. It was a tough day, but that evening, I wasn't alone. Project Respect was running an art therapy session. I almost didn't go, until another survivor messaged me and said, "Where are you? We are waiting." So there I was, jogging over, running late, but I made it, and I wasn't alone. That evening, the slide isn't there, I created a memory box. I know I'm not the biggest artist, but that's not what it's about. It's about community and coming together and doing it together. And I started making new memories. I tried to make some moss and a weirdly colored rainbow. And I made a sunset over the ocean with some whales, symbolizing the first Australian League, the first time us survivors came together here in Wollongong. Bringing survivors together is truly transformational, and I hope you can all experience this over the next 2 days. While not everything has worked out in my journey as a survivor, this time things started working just a little bit better. Before I finish, I want to leave you with a poem. It's called "My Superpower is All of Us." I'm resilience infused with empathy. I'm witness to human cruelty and human kindness. What was meant to break me is now my power. I'm questioning, reflecting, rebuilding, choosing to live, to connect, to love. Sharing the truth is a gift, creating a path of healing. It's not about me, it's about us. It's about all of us. It's about community, about connection, about country, and the freedom that belongs to everyone. I'm a survivor, now thriving, illuminating the path alongside others, working towards the day when all of us are free. Thank you.
Before I begin, I wanted to honor every person in this room and across the world who has walked through the fires of exploitation, coercion, and control. and still found the courage to rise. You are the survivors, and you are the reason I speak. You are proof that even after the storm, the river can still run clear. It is easy to look at the swirling rapids, the chaos downstream, and wonder how anyone could survive them. But I know those waters. I was swept up in them once, pulled under by kindness that turned to control, by promises that became chains. For a long time, I thought remedy meant learning how to swim harder. To survive what I had been through, but the real remedy lives far upstream. Before the river ever reaches the rapids, it runs through childhood. It runs through silence and loneliness, through generations where pain was passed like an heirloom. Before the grooming, before the coercion, there are stories of people unseen, unheard, unprotected. When I speak of remedy, I speak of going back there, to the headwaters, to heal the soil where the river begins. That is where prevention lives. Prevention is teaching our daughters that love does not demand silence. Prevention is showing our sons that power is not control. Prevention is building strong families, safe communities, and systems that see the vulnerable before the current takes them. The person I once was did not need rescuing from the rapids. They needed someone to notice the currents forming long before. Someone to tell them that their worth was not measured by who loved them, but by the truth of who they already were. That is where my work now, to clear the water upstream. Toward where the water begins, toward where healing can truly start. The only way the river runs clear is if we cleanse it at its source. So I will keep tending to that headwater. For those yet to be born, for those still finding their strength, for the survivors who remind me every day that clarity and kindness can flow again. That is my restoration, and that is my remedy, to clear the water upstream, so downstream life can finally be gentle. Thank you.
I'm speaking in the form of a poem. It's called Dear Remedy. This was quite difficult for me because I like to think that I'm a very creative person, but in practice it doesn't always come across. So while this for me was also quite healing, it was quite difficult. Dear Remedy, you came dressed in paper, with pens and reports. You spoke of protection, of justice, of courts. You said you were safety, a system, a plan, but somehow I ended up less than I began. You came with your binders, your checklists, your claim. You called it reform, but it carried my name. You mistook my endurance for something that I chose. You never once asked where the fear truly grows. You wrote that I'd failed to escape what took hold, ignored every story I tried to unfold. You called it freedom, had handed me chains. You measured compliance and justified pain. You came dressed in paper, smelling of ink and instruction, speaking in forms when I needed function. The kind that holds, that hums, that hears. You told me my freedom was near. But your hands wrote my story in someone else's fear. You saw my silence and called it consent, never asked where my safety went. You saw my bruises as evidence neat, but you never looked down to the chains on my feet. You said I was safe now while I stood in the ruins, barefoot on blame beneath all your doings. You mistook the ash on my skin for defiance, when really it was what was left after violence. You came dressed in paper, but I learnt to ignite. I used your reports to rekindle my light. You thought survival was silence or shame, but I carried my truth through the flicker of flame. I hid my healing in humble things, in lullabies, in wings, in the way I taught my children to trust again, in the way I built home from pain. I became my own witness, my own appeal, turned cold reports into something real. Found my reflection not in decree, but in the eyes of others who looked at me. I found remedy in the soil, not the file, in the slow return of my children's smile, in country that held me when people withdrew, in peers who whispered, I believe you. It came through aunties, through peers, through ground, through voices that said, you're safe now, you're found. It came through story, through care, through grace, through people who met me heart to face. Because remedy is not paperwork, not laws or degrees. It's trust built slowly, it's space to breathe. It's knowing the difference between fixing and feeling, between risk management and actual healing. You came dressed in paper, but now so do I, with pages rewritten beneath open sky. I write not to plead, but to show what I've grown. To say the foundation was cracked, but we've made it on our own. Now my children are home, the walls hum with song, proof that broken can still belong. We're stitched together in golden scar, and love has survived exactly as we are. I've learned, dear Remedy, through ache and untrust, that healing is human and hope does the rest. That safety begins when stories are heard, when trust becomes more than a word. So here's my question to you, to all in this space. Will you keep chasing outcomes or start honouring grace? Will you walk beside those still finding their ground and listen for truths yet to be found? Because remedy is not a policy, a tick or decree. It's a space between you and me. It's the peer who stays when the systems were cold, the hand that holds when the story's retold. It's the river returning to country's embrace, the light that still grows in a long darkened place. It's survivors turned leaders, voices that guide, the power of with, not for, by our side. So dear Remedy, if you're still becoming, remember this truth when the talking stops humming. The future you seek won't be written above. It's built right here in community and care and in love. Because you came dressed in paper, but we come as a flame. And through that fire, we've reclaimed your name, because remedy was never yours to bestow. It's ours to live and let go.
My name is Thomas. I first want to say that I feel honoured that I've been given this opportunity to share a part of me with all of you today. For a long time, I didn't have the words to describe what I'd been through. This gap in my understanding kept me small, disconnected, and unsure of where I fit. By connecting with other survivors, I discovered something powerful, that I am not alone. Language can be a lifeline, but community and solidarity can heal wounds and mend hearts. The right words don't just help me to tell my story, they bring me hope. And when spoken in community, those words begin to heal. That journey of finding language, community, and ultimately finding myself, my truth. is what inspired the poem I'd like to share with you now. There was a time when silence was my only tongue, when I mistook survival for living and confusion for truth. I had no words for what was happening, no language to name the unseen chains. Only the ache of endurance, the hollow sound of just get through it. But words have power. They can wound, but they can also awaken. And when I began to learn their shape, their weight, their purpose, something shifted. Language became a bridge, a light cutting through fog. Each word a thread pulling me from isolation into understanding, into hope. When I learned the words modern slavery, it was not just another label. It was a key that unlocked the door to a truth I had lived, but never had the words to name. And through that door I found others, people who spoke the same silence I once did, people who understood the language of endurance before we ever spoke a word aloud. Our voices, once scattered, began to find one another, and together we have to build a new dialect, a dialect of courage, of laughter that heals, of truths that refuse to stay quiet. In community, I learned that strength is plural, that one voice can start a ripple, but many voices can move a tide. Survivor to survivor, we teach each other what healing sounds like, what hope looks like in human form. Because when we stand together, we remember that our stories are not scars but seeds. And when survivors plant their stories together, we grow forests. Roots intertwined, branches reaching for justice, for peace, for one another. Language gave me clarity, community gave me hope. Together they gave me back my voice. A voice not just to tell my story, but to transform it. Not just to speak truth, but to build futures. Not just to survive, but to lead. Thank you.
I'm not much of a poetry writer or a public speaker, actually, but putting on my big girl pants and giving it a go. So mine is called The Remedy is Voice. I grew up thinking it was normal to be watched, normal to be afraid, normal to have your thoughts policed and your body controlled, normal to measure your worth by compliance and to confuse silence with goodness. It was the only world that I knew, a world that called itself holy and taught children that salvation came through surrender. We were told that doubt was sin, that curiosity was rebellion, that self-love was selfishness, a poison to be purged. To disappear was the goal, to become nothing was devotion. A speck of dust, a diamond of dust, they called it. The idea was simple, they said, if you could make yourself nothing, truly nothing at all. When the wind came and lifted you just so, and you drifted past a window at the perfect moment, and the light caught you, you might sparkle for a second. That was the aspiration, to be carried only by the will of God, their idea of God. Directionless, will-less, voiceless, belonging not even to yourself. Hoping that light, their approved version of light, might pass through you long enough to make you beautiful, maybe. Otherwise, you were nothing. That was holiness, that was love, that was the dream, to become invisible enough to be worthy. And I believed it, because when you're born into erasure, you learn to call it faith. We were separated from our families, told that love for our mothers, our fathers, our siblings was weakness. Family was to be dismantled so devotion could be complete. We were isolated from the world, cut off from education, kept away from school, from other children, even relatives, from anything that might show us how life could be different. God forbid we discover how big and beautifully diverse the experience of living could be. As children, we labored in the home, doing work meant for adults before we were even old enough to know what play was. We were sent out to busk, to perform, to sell their materials, to beg, to witness, they called it. From morning until night, our hands, our bodies, our voices were theirs to use. And on special occasions, the ones that the world celebrated with joy, like Christmas, we worked even harder. Days and nights of rehearsals, training, performing, smiling for strangers, while hunger gnawed quietly beneath and blisters burned the back of our tired feet. Those weren't holidays, they were showcases. They were proof of their devotion, the product of their obedience. No remuneration ever came back our way. We had nothing new, nothing of our own. We were hungry more often than not at times. And the only time we felt beautiful to someone was when they dressed us to be seen by the world, to demonstrate their own goodness. Never beautiful for or to ourselves or those we loved, just for being us or just for being at all. And when the physical, sexual, emotional, and psychological harm came, as it did again and again, we were told it was divine, that pain was purification, that the breaking of the body, the mind, the soul, and of innocence itself was the cleansing of spirit. Nothing became normal for me. As a child born into this world, it was always my normal. The air I breathed, the rules I lived by, and the child I was learned to make herself small enough to fit inside the cult leader's idea of holiness, one that demanded the complete subjugation of mind, body, and soul. When you are born inside control, you don't recognize captivity, you just call it home. And the outside world, that bright, loud, terrifying world, was as foreign to me as genuine, no-strings-attached kindness. So when the day eventually came that I found myself living in this foreign world, I moved through it like a ghost, disconnected, disassociated, a body with no map, nowhere to belong, too strange for freedom, too silent for the living, half here, half gone. At 16, I let a sliver of truth escape me, a small glimpse of what I'd survived, although I just called it childhood. And he, a friend, looked at me and stepped back and said quietly, "We have nothing in common." He didn't mean to wound me, but that sentence burrowed deep, a quiet verdict that I was too different, too damaged, too much. And so I ran again towards normality, towards invisibility. I hid inside busyness, inside other people's comfort, desperate for the safety of blending in, because attention, the wrong kind of attention, had already torn through me, not once, but my entire life. Every time that I was seen, it was by eyes that took, by hands that claimed, by people who said it was love. And so I learned to vanish before anyone could notice me at all. And vanishing felt like safety until it didn't. Because for years, I felt like I was flying by the seat of my pants, improvising existence, wearing a mask that smiled and functioned so no one would look too closely. I became what people wanted to see, friendly, capable, adaptable, the one who could handle anything, even the strong one that people turned to or relied on when they were facing challenges. The world believed that version of me. But underneath, I was dying inside. Every compliment, every success, every laugh was a reminder of how carefully I had built the facade and how terrified I was, that if anyone ever saw beneath it, that they would walk away too. I felt like a fraud in my own skin, living on instinct, performing survival. It took years outside those walls, the ones that I was born into and the ones that I later built myself. Freedom and being true to me felt far too dangerous to even consider, because the familiarity of horror you know can feel safer than the uncertainty of freedom. But then, drip by painful drip, to learn that what I had called normal was never normal at all, to realize that this weight of shame that I had lived and carried was not actually mine to carry at all. And then came the grief for what I never had, for the family that I will never know as most families know each other, for the childhood that was stolen, the education denied, the innocence traded for survival, for the faces of loved ones who broke under the weight of unheard, unresolved trauma, for a pattern that I have known since the age of 7, which is watching peer after peer slip away, their light extinguished by a pain that no one dared to see. For the generations still bound to what was done, the patterns that must be broken but are nearly impossible to see, because how do you recognize, much less break, a pattern that you were born inside of when you have no basis to know what healthy even looks like, no map to show you where healing begins or what it even means to heal? The trauma nearly cost me my life. There were years that I could see no way through. when the pain was so great and the shame so heavy that silence felt like the only escape. I didn't have a language for what had happened. I didn't have the space or the strength to face it, name it, or heal it. All I wanted was to stop the ache and to disappear completely. But then I realized that if I left, my children would inherit that silence, that the same unspoken pain would find its way into them, and I could never be the cause of the very harm that almost destroyed me. That realization broke me open and saved me all at once, because I finally understood what love should look like, what protection should feel like, what my caregivers should have seen, and that became my beginning. Healing is not linear. It comes like grief in waves that knock you down and carry you forward all at once. Some days you feel whole, other days you drown in memory. But healing is the choice to keep stepping forward, to survive, persist, speak, and create space for others to do the same. Remedy is remembering with purpose, taking the voice that was buried and using it to break the pattern. It's standing here and saying, I was there, and still I am here. Response is what follows. It's not just my freedom, it's what we build together. It's the courage to listen, to care, to intervene. Because when I first spoke, I didn't need rescue, I needed recognition. I needed someone to say, I see you, I believe you, it wasn't your fault, and it was far from normal or what you deserved. I speak now because I want to be part of the solution. I don't want another child to live out their entire childhood without anyone coming to look for them, to disappear beneath the red tape, the politics, the appearances, the show, the noise that hides the horror beneath. I don't want another child smiling on the outside while dying quietly on the inside, trying to please whoever they're around so nobody sees the pain beneath the surface. I want to be part of the remedy. I want to change and break the systems that keep children and adults trapped in cycles of control, invisible to the world that says it cares. And that starts with having hard conversations, with hearing, really hearing the voices of those who lived it, because stories like mine can't just be heard, they have to be listened to, and others must be just as invested in changing the systems that made these stories possible. Because the remedy is not only in finding our voice, it is listening, it is change, it's the love that stays, and the response is us. Thank you.
Thanks, Annabelle. I think when we hear, or one of the things that really strikes me when I see all of the people on the stage that we have with us today, there are so many different places and different ways that modern slavery can happen. And both, as children, as adults, in different contexts. And I think, we have a very diverse representation on the stage today. It is their stories to share, but I want to, say that in this group, we've got people that have experienced, forced marriage, forced labour, servitude, sexual exploitation as children in different ways, in different places, as adults. And I think it's, in disability services, we've got it happening in cults and religious high control groups. We've got it happening across in homes, in other contexts, and I think that's what is so important in hearing these voices, to know that it can happen in so many different ways, and that the journeys that we carry with us in healing, thank you for reminding us about the process that takes, and how much it is to carry that process while we're also living and trying to survive and thrive and rebuild.
I have written this poem a while back, a couple of years ago, which I have also gotten the Buland Parwaz, the name of our organization, from this poem that I have written, and I just thought I will share this with you all today. I don't know if you're gonna have the translation, because I will be reading this in Dari. Do you have the translation? Beautiful. Okay, thank you. I'm gonna read it in my own language because I can actually feel the emotions, and it seems very authentic to myself. 11 سالم بود
و باد دامن کودکیم را با خود برد. روسری سپید سنگین تر از سالهایم بود و لبخندم در عکس عروسی جا ماند. شبها با صدای گریه عروسکم می خوابیدم و صبحها با ترس صدای در بیدار می شدم. می گفتم ای آینه، چرا چشمانم پیر شده اند؟ چرا صدایم دیگر کودک نیست؟ اما روزی میان سکوت صدایی از درونم برخاست، بلند، پاک، مثل تپش زمین پس از باران. گفت برخیز، جهان هنوز برای توست، دختر آفتاب. و من برخاستم از میان سایه ها، از میان ترس، از خانه‌ای که سقفش از رویا کوتاه‌تر بود. اکنون در آینه دختری را می‌بینم که موهایش را به نسیم می‌سپارد و می‌خندد بی هیچ دلیل جز زندگی. من همانم که بودم، اما نه در قفس، که در بلند پرواز. و دانسته‌ام عشق اگر آزاد نباشد نامش زنجیر است، نه عشق. Thank you so much.
Before I get started on what I've prepared for today, I want to say a very big thank you to our Anti-Slavery Commissioner, Dr. James Cockayne, and his team for all their hard work in making this forum happen and for giving people like us the chance to have our voices heard. And thank you to every one of you who have attended and taken the time to listen, because it is with your help, alongside survivor input, that we can see real change. Change in how professionals are trained, changed in how survivors are supported, and changed in how our systems respond when signs of exploitation are right in front of them. Now, some of you I have met before, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah. I am a survivor of multiple forms of modern slavery and family, domestic and sexual violence. My experiences are of child marriage, child commercial sexual exploitation, or put more bluntly, forced child prostitution, adult sexual servitude, debt bondage, domestic and sexual violence, and CSA. For 36 years, from the age of 3 till 9, I lived through cycles of exploitation that were preventable. It is those years, those mischances, that bring me here, because I want to show you not only the cost of silence, but the power of response when it comes in time. One of my earliest and clearest examples came when I was 13 years old. After enduring an extended period of CCSE, I was eventually sold into a forced marriage to a man many years my senior. And one day, I escaped. I walked into a police station, frightened, near naked, vulnerable, and I asked for help. But I walked out that same night with no support, no protection, no intervention. That was a missed opportunity which came with horrific consequences. That was a moment when remedy through response should have been possible. But instead of safety, what followed for me was a downward spiral. Walking out of that police station with no response, no recognition, and no help at all meant I was pushed further into vulnerability until I was trapped in sexual servitude and horrific circumstances that no person should ever have to endure. A cycle that did not end until I was 39. Rather than response and remedy opening the door to safety, healing, and a very different life, that one failure to respond opened the door to decades of further harm. So I cannot stress enough that remedy is not only about justice after harm, it is about preventing further harm through timely, effective response. Throughout those 36 years, there were countless opportunities for intervention.
child psychologists, police officers, teachers, doctors, community workers, even family members. People saw me. The signs were there. They were always there. But they went unrecognised, or worse, ignored. I would like to provide an example of this. After escaping 8 years of sexual servitude, I went to my female GP. I attempted to share some of what I had experienced. She interrupted me after a few minutes, saying it wasn't medically relevant and that disclosing this to her was unnecessary. She would not listen to the rest of what I had to say. That was a missed opportunity. If she had been trained in trauma-informed care, she could have connected me to services. She could have changed my trajectory. Instead, I remained vulnerable and fell again into abuse. This further abuse led to a sexual assault so violent that 2 bones in my neck were broken. This was preventable. This was all preventable. I share this not to blame one individual, but to highlight a pattern. A pattern where frontline professionals are not trained to see what is right in front of them. A pattern where systems are not designed to protect the most vulnerable. And a pattern where the absence of response allows the cycle to continue. This is why remedy must include systemic reform. Mandatory trauma-informed training for all frontline professionals, doctors, nurses, teachers, police and community workers, because a lack of understanding should never cost someone their safety. Clear referral pathways so that survivors are never left to navigate alone. Support should not depend on luck, but on structure. Education embedded across schools, universities and professional training programs to build recognition of coercion and exploitation, because if people cannot recognise what they see, they cannot respond. Legal frameworks and a victim services scheme that reflect the lived reality of survivors rather than re-traumatising them through bureaucracy. Justice should heal, not harm. Community awareness, because safety cannot rest only on professionals. Everyday people must also be able to recognise the signs of exploitation. Sometimes survivors do not know they are being exploited, or they may feel too intimidated to seek help. But neighbours, friends, colleagues and family can notice when something is wrong and they can act. And survivor leadership. Survivors must be partners in designing, evaluating and delivering programs and policies. Our lived experience is not just our personal history, it is expertise. Now, we cannot change the past. And I cannot undo 36 years of missed opportunities in my own life. But together, we can ensure that those opportunities are not missed for the next generation. Most of us here today know the number of people that are living through modern slavery in our country today. We all know that figure is unacceptable, and it will only come down when awareness is matched with action and when remedy is understood as response. Timely, effective, survivor-centred response. The overarching message I want to leave with you is simple. Remedy begins with response. If we fail to respond, we condemn survivors to repeat cycles of harm. But if we respond appropriately, we create pathways to freedom, to healing, and to justice. So let us choose to respond, and let us choose to create remedy. And when you think about what that means, I ask you to remember this. A frightened 13-year-old girl once walked into a police station asking for help and walked out with nothing. No child should ever have to leave empty-handed. No survivor should ever have to face silence instead of response. That is the cost of failure, and that is the urgency of change. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all for holding this space with us. We understand that some of the stories you've heard today and the things that people have shared are heavy. They're really heavy. And in preparing for this forum, we did a focus group with survivors, preparing for how we could create the space that we wanted to share. And we had a discussion about the topic of how do we share our realities without making it too heavy for the people that might hear. That was what we were worried about. But we carry this every day. We come to these spaces, we come to this work, and we see our realities represented in academic terms, in discourse, in discussions that are devoid of our realities. Maybe if we saw more of that heaviness, more of that pain, we would act. So we know that we've left heaviness with you, but we ask you, we're carrying it. Together we carry it. Let's carry it forward to change together. And you will see us laugh. You'll see us, in the debrief yesterday, I think we had a lot of laughter. You saw us dance last night on the dance floor. We are not our stories. The pieces of it that you've heard today are only fractions. We're not just doomed to those parts of our story. We're fighting for a future, and we want you to all fight with us. And we're all fighting so that others don't have to live our realities. So we thank you for holding the space. Every single one of these survivors wanted to be here to share what they shared today, and we wanted to give them the time and the space to do so. So we thank you for hearing it and for carrying it with us, and we look forward to working together to build real freedom. Thank you.
People who know me know I'm not very often lost for words, but I really only want to say three things in response to that incredible panel that we've just been privileged to witness. The first is thank you. Thank you to all of you and to all the survivors who are here who were supporting what was said just now. The second is we are listening. People in this room are listening and they're trying to hear. As Moe and Matilda said this morning and yesterday, we may not be perfect, we may not get it perfect, but we are listening and we're trying to hear, and we'll keep doing that. And the third is just to focus on a word that many of you used, Sarah there at the end, together. That's how change will come. Together.